Welcome and thank you for joining us this Culture Night 2021 at Ballybane Library on the east side of Galway City. Joining me this evening are fellow librarians and book lovers Siobhán Arkins and Ruth Browne, and special guest, the People's Pandemic Poet Laureate, Rita Higgins, as we discuss poetry and reading through the pandemic. During part one, I'll be talking to Rita about her most recent collection of poems, Pathogens Love, Patsy, and her essay, The Longest Listen, as part of the RTE Illuminations project. In part two, we'll be chatting about how and what we and others have been reading over the last 18 months. Rita, you're very welcome and thank you for joining us. You've been a very productive woman over the last 18 months. A new collection of poems, Pathogens Love, Patsy, a series of podcasts with Eileen O'Connor, and an 86-hour listen to the King James Bible on Audible. Can you tell us how the lockdown has been for you, in both personally and in your writing?
Well, it's been long, but I've been very busy. When I first was asked by RT, it was actually Brendan O'Connor who contacted me and said, "Have you a poem about this pandemic?" And I said, I actually don't. I said, I'm working on a sequence about Hannah Greeley, and it's a completely different thing, and I just want to focus on this. So I just basically said no. And then when I had the sequence finished, I thought, well, this pandemic is still here, it's still going on. Initially there was thoughts it mightn't be so long. And I love to have projects. You know, if I don't have a project, I just overeat or whatever, you know, don't walk or. So if I have a project, I'll do all the other. I'll do good stuff. Yeah. So in terms of maybe walking to clear the head and that. Mm-hmm. So I started on the pandemic poems, and I just worked from Monday to the Saturday morning on writes and rewrites and drafts. And oddly enough, they all kind of end on the 18th draft. It's weird because I have them all sectioned off now. And it just seems to be on the 18th, basta, it's all over. Because then I have lost interest in the poem, and I have written out as many times as I possibly can, and I start with the handwritten version, which isn't the best version. I don't know if there is a best version, but I would start off like that. And then so that kept me really busy, because I was sending in the poems. The poems were nearly coming weekly at one stage, and then maybe fortnightly, but before I knew it, I had enough for a collection, because I'd been in contact with Jessie Lendenny of Salmon, and she's always been really supportive. Always, yeah. And of course I have Blood Axe as well in the UK, and but Jessie was very clued in, and she said, why don't we try to get that in a volume form for you, which was a wonderful offer, you know what I mean, to be reading them there, but to have a home for them then behind covers.
Yes, and covers. I've really been enjoying the collection. It's the 3 separate sections I noticed, and the first and the last, you've got before and after COVID, and then you have the Hannah Greeley section. It has all the hallmarks of your compassion and your sense of social justice, your mastery of language, your scathing wit, and just your astute observation. But I'd love you to read from some of your poems, and I'd love to chat to you then maybe after about Hannah Greeley.
Absolutely.
And also your listening of the King James Bible. That'll be fantastic.
So shall I read the title poem?
I'd love that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Pathogens Love, Patsy. Don't be getting ahead of where we need to be. Where we need to be is not where we are. We are waiting for the phases. Phase 1 is coming soon, but not soon enough. The 5th of never never came and never will. The 18th of May is a red carpet speech away. Wait and seek, hide and find, stay well behind. Listen to the experts, if you like. You don't have to believe them, but be kind. The coronavirus cliches are clocking up. We don't want the cure to be worse than the disease. We are not reaching our milestones, but our liver stones are as big as beach balls. Don't mention beach to me. Operation Connacht won't let you breach the beach or drink the bleach this bank holiday. Operation Connacht will be like Francis Thompson's Hound of Heaven. It will chase you down the nights and down the days, except when the text says, "Your fry is on the table, loving." You'll hear the sirens then. Or when another Garda says, "Come on now, Jimmy, for a game of spot." Let them breach the beach and drink the bleach all they want, Jimmy. We all know there's a virus in the village and it's coming home to roost. We are doing our Trojan best. The drones are coming and taking high-res photos of your car. They can see all those chalk ice wrappers under the seats. Trust no one. Is that a mobile home parked outside your car, or are you just happy to see me? Melania Murphy is shredding the net curtains with her teeth, watching those day trippers galloping over the lacuna, and she boxed in since God knows when. Operation Connacht has no power over the lacuna. All Melania Murphy has to look forward to is the filth proffered in the multiple ads she sees nightly for normal people. Operation Connacht won't let you breach the beach, drink the bleach or eat your young. The biggest devils are the smallest airborne aerosols lurking in the aisles of supermarkets, waiting for you to breathe them out or your neighbour to breathe them in. Pathogens love a Patsy. Move on. Mask up, mask often, wash them hands. Don't be an ass in the aisle. Never mind the minutiae of the yogurt label. Move on. Get fresh air into your lungs. Hug your cat or your dog. Take affection where you can. Pathogens love a Patsy. Move on.
Brilliant. It's funny, it reminds me of Dermot Balger, who also features in the RTE Illuminations project, speaks of how we turn to poems in uncertain times.
That's right.
And how a poem won't tell us the statistics, but it might tell us about what it felt to be alive now. And I think that poem is, the whole Operation Connacht was all about the statistics.
Yes, and also it kind of places it in time, because it was the time somebody in America was talking about the bleach, remember?
Who was that somebody?
And Operation Connacht, and yeah, you know, it kind of, each one is set in that time.
Yes.
And you see, it was the 18th of June, I think, or the 18th of March, or whatever, 18, I hope I put the, I'm not sure if I put the date in, but you know, because you wouldn't dream of putting the year in, because you thought it was going to be over soon.
Well, we didn't know that
Yeah,
18 months
so-
later,
Yeah,
we'd still be talking about it and still not fully free of it. Yeah. There's another wonderful poem in there which I would love you to read on page 29, Life Will Be Different.
Okay, 59.
And then maybe we'll chat a bit about Hannah Greeley, maybe.
Okay. Life will be different. We are tired of pandemic isms that were banged around like bin lids during the Troubles. Who are we now when we are not using new words that are pandemic steeped and pickled? It has been every waking minute a pandemic zone, and we are sick of it. Antibody talk and cures that are not curses at all. Walk 3 times sideways under your shadow. For this to work, align yourself with your shadow. Do this for 2 hours and 2 hours only. Other aforementioned cures involve heavy duty bleach. Don't do it, your insides won't hold, and you'll be slouching to the vet, your eyes rolling down your face, looking for their sockets. We have become pandemic experts. and pandemic poets. We are mourning our lives before this, when we took for granted simple things like free money, like parking at the beach before the appearance of the orange cone, which has now taken on a sinister hue. Look around before you spin that cone into infinity. The pandemic police are hiding in the very long grass. We will do old things again, like walk into TK Maxx and fit on Prussian blue blouse that won't fit, and those salsa jeans that look at you as if to say, who are you kidding? We fed that virus for months, and now the muffin top repels us. We will be slim again, and the virus will be gone, but not if we are to believe some naysayers who say it will be with us all the Christmases of our lives. Someday we will sit in a pub with our hair coloured and quiffed. Laughter will be absent from the space between us. That expanse will make us cautious and awkward. We will wave to people across the street, but gone are the whispering sessions where you'd gasp on hearing some juicy gossip or insider information about white-collar cokeheads watching porn for 48 hours on a bank holiday weekend. A pirated clip from normal people on a loop is a purported favourite. From now on, when you meet old friends, you will just wave and life will be different. The day I long for most is the day I can pop into Penneys for the cheap knickers and cosy pyjamas. I might throw in a pair of slippers with the free money. When that day comes, I will make an altar in the garden. I will burn incense sticks, myrrh, ylang ylang. I will pay homage. I will howl for all I am worth.
Brilliant.
And oddly enough, I didn't realise I had mentioned Normal people twice.
Oh yeah.
That's the second poem.
Yeah, it was quite it was a feature of a
Yeah.
lot of times.
And the ads, so many ads about it.
That's true, yeah, gosh. That's just fantastic. The poem Hannah Greeley, can you tell us about that? Because I found it's quite a harrowing tale, and it's kind of, I noticed as well when you have the three sections before COVID, during COVID and before COVID. And before COVID, you really do go back to before. You go back to more bygone time, and I'm wondering if that was partly influenced by kind of that whole taking stock of things during lockdown.
In the normal course of events, you kind of rely on memory, and if something happens, you say, oh, that reminds me. Like when I go on my walks out to the racecourse, I grew up in one of those cottages out near the racecourse, and I absolutely love that part of the world. But I have an awful lot of good memories, and for a poem to kind of get kick-started, it could happen with the memory. So before COVID, that section of poems, they were just about a memory that would happen that you would then kind of work on or tease out or invite into your head and your heart and work on it. But you mentioned the Hannah Greeley section. Many years ago, I bought a copy of Bird's Nest Soup, a memoir by Hannah Greeley. I got it in the second-hand shop in Abbygate Street. It was Book Exchange, I think was the name of the place. And I just couldn't believe this memoir by the woman called Hannah Greeley. And she was actually on the Late Late Show talking about her book. And I contacted the Late Late Show, but they had I contacted RTE, but they had no copies of that interview. So she basically, what happened to her was she was nursing in London during the Blitz, and she became traumatized and post-traumatic stress disorder, I believe, and she came home, and she would have been perhaps acting oddly or weird or whatever, and she had some discussions with her mother that it would be best if she went into the big house and had a rest. A rest was the euphemism. And so she went in for the rest, and she just waited and waited and waited for that letter to be written by somebody to get her out. She couldn't get out at that time. You couldn't get out without a letter. Things have changed since then. But still, if you're sectioned, it can be problematic. But anyway, so I wrote a play about Hannah Greeley, and I spent years working on the play, and Druid were looking at it, and they read it, and they seemed to be liking it a lot, but it never, I just said to the person that I was dealing with, well, are you putting it on? And he said, no, we're actually full up for 3 years. And you see, theatre is a different world, and I'm not too familiar with it, even though I've had a couple of plays on. But so I thought, oh my God, it really kind of stuck with me, the Hannah and her story. And as I say, when I first got the call about the pandemic poems, I was working on this sequence about Hannah's life. I thought, why do I have to insist that it's a play? Why don't I try to make poems? Well, they were the hardest poems I've ever written. And I've never cried during writing before. But I just cried through that.
And I cried reading it as well.
It's
heartbreaking.
It's tough. It's tough going. And she eventually got out, but she had to wait 20 years. She was nearly 20 years. She went in there a young woman of 19, and she was 62 or 63 when she came out. She went in 1943, and she just waited for this letter. Anybody could give this letter, any family member, and it's an address she needed, so that she'd have an address to be contacted at. And if you didn't, it's like another bigger picture of, if you don't have an address, you are effectively homeless. And she didn't have an address, and in the meantime her mother died. And I wouldn't make any judgments on her mother, it was...
No, and I think that comes across in the poem as well, how difficult it would have been for her mother also.
Yeah, because I don't have the mother's memoir. There wasn't a memoir.
Yes.
I don't have the mother's side of it. But you'd be inclined to judge and be angry at the mother, but I haven't the right to be. I have to pull back a bit there and just focus on her and her voice. And some of the poems are real. They're from stories in her a memoir, and some are imagined. You'd have to put your own, as a writer, you'd have to say, well, this is how I'm going to work on this, because they're real poems to me. They got the same treatment as any poem. The hard graft and the rewriting, and they got that same treatment. Should I read?
I'd love to hear. Okay. Yeah, it's quite a long poem.
I won't read it.
I won't read it.
I'll read a couple of sections. So I'll start with one. I'm Hannah Greeley, and I want to go home. All you needed to get out of here was a letter. It could be 3 lines, or 5 lines, or 6 lines. It didn't have to be from a near relative. But if it was from a loving mother, then surely it would carry you across the Shannon, too. The letter had only to be from a responsible person, a person who didn't hear voices or have vivid dreams, a person who didn't rub shite in their hair, just a regular boring person with a box room going a-begging. If you didn't have a home to go to, an address was the thing. It didn't matter how many layers of clothes you had on in the big house. I liked to layer. I liked to hide my shape, even though a man once said to me I was voluptua, whatever that meant. No matter how many layers you had on, the superintendent could always see through you, right through to your tired sinews. And like a big tell-tattler, he'd tell your mother, I think she needs more rest. And I'll skip on and maybe read 1 or 2 at the end. 20. If nasty Nora saw you talking casually to one of the men from any of the many shops around here, in this crazy little village, only it was not so little, it housed 3,000 patients. It had tuck shops, hardware shops, carpentry shops, more like sheds, but you could get stuff. She'd haul you off into her office and make something dirty out of it. Don't tell me you were talking to him about making you a coffin, Hannah Hopeful. Were you asking the carpenter to lie in the field with you, you dirty little witch? I'm on to you. Treatment 21. Treatments meandered in like arrogant relatives. Salt instead of porridge. Sedatives if you leave your beak open. Keep your lips pursed at all times. Liquid paraffin for supper. We didn't know how good we had it until they tried to light us up. The lecky therapy would whip us into shape. You'd be compliant after that, Sizzler. Hiss. Bite down, girl. Bite down, Hannah. Shake, rattle and roll. Flip's sake, Hannah, you're getting sick on your nightie. Have you no shame? The nightie your mother bought you for that birthday. Which one was it? Tick tock. Is that blood? Have you your friend, Hannah? Why didn't you tell us? And I'll go now towards the end of that segment, end of the sequence. I'll read 28 and 29. For the time I was here, I had written thousands of letters. Noreen's twins made their first Holy Communion, their confirmation. They had a lovely double wedding, fair play to them. Noreen didn't write as often as she used to after her mother died. I think she was afraid I'd ask her to claim me out. God knows I asked everyone else. You were everyone's buddy until there was a chance you might be asked for the loan of an address. 29. Here in the left luggage department, the time passes out the dust particles, and the dust particles win. The force of inertia, the tease of tumbleweed, they interlock like a double genitive. All that possession and emptiness fills your days. You come to inhabit terms like remnant road, rubbish avenue, abyss with no bliss, or put another way, abyssless bliss. Thank you, miss. It's not that we are all lost. Most of us were never found. We were never lost. We were left. It's not a lost and loster department. It's a leave them to rot department. Find me. I'm Hannah Greeley, and I want to go home.
Brilliant. So it's actually it's reminding me of, I've just been to see Medicine, Enda Walsh's new play, and similar theme, in that kind of people abandoned and lost in these places when and basically how we treat mental illness in this country.
And it was such a huge place, They had,
where was that?
It was in Mullingar.
Mullingar. It sounds like the place in Sligo. It's now a hotel.
It was St. Loman's in Mullingar.
Yeah.
Do you know what kind
of? That's of course you're not. You mentioned there that you have written plays and you've also written essays. People know you more as a poet, but you've recently written an essay called "The Longest Listen," and in response to your listening of the King James Bible, which was kind of a fascinating project to undertake. It highlights to me as well how much kind of research and invisible work goes in behind writings as well.
That's right.
And Siobhán and I were commenting earlier about how a lot of your poems, while they're very much grounded in the real and now have a lot of references to Greek mythology.
Oh, yes.
And we were saying it'd be interesting now, you having been absorbed in listening to the Bible over the last number of months, will we see these biblical references coming in? I'm even wondering if the number 18, does that come up anywhere in these significant numbers in the Bible? I don't know.
7 does anyway.
But can you tell us about...
I'll tell you about that, but I'll tell you first about the Greek mythology. When I started to write first, when I was going to that earlier workshop with Jessie Lendenny and her husband at the time, Mike Allen, I hadn't written a lot of poems, and I was saying, what is this Greek mythology? Who is this? I'd say a name, and I'd say, who is that person? Who's this person? And I think, the thing was, people were saying, well, that's Greek mythology. So actually, I got, in the children's section of the library in Galway, I got the Iliad and the Aeneid, like from the children's section, and it was a long time ago, and it completely blew my mind, So that's how I got interested in it and remain interested ever since. But to get back to your main question about the illuminations, so then I had that first project finished. I had the book of poems, and I thought, well, I'm not going to do another book of poems in about the pandemic, but as it happens, there's a lot more of them coming. So I had time, and it just opportunistically, somebody else rang me and said we were doing this, asking artists to do something. Have you anything on the go? And I said, well, I've always wanted to read the whole Bible, but I knew it wasn't something I'd really be able to do, because I like to dip into the Bible at home. But I am going to listen to the whole Bible. And she said, well, would you ever write an essay about that? And I said, well, I wouldn't think I'd be able to write an essay about it. So anyway, I started listening to it. And then I'd be going for a drive, going for the walk is the thing I love more than anything, and going on the beach, going to the race course. You do 2 hours, you do 4 hours of it, and I didn't take any notes when I was listening to it, because I thought I'm going to respond to it as a listen.
Right.
I'm not going to respond to it as a study or any kind of a semi-academic project, because it wasn't any of that for me. It was going to be the longest listen. So I listened, and I then wrote that essay, and they recorded it, and it's on the RT Illuminations portal or website or whatever you say. And it was a fascinating time, because then I did it, and then I could look back on it, and I could see I was kind of annoyed with God a lot of the time, because he was so angry.
Is that because you were stuck in the Old Testament?
The horrors of the Old Testament,
Yeah.
So then, and I didn't mind Jesus at all. I thought, God, I really like him, and he's nice, and wouldn't it be nice? I don't really know a lot of people like the Jesus that I met in the listening of the Bible, and but it was a fascinating project, I have to say, and that was basically it. It was listening to it, and then sitting down and trying to think of where did I remembered.
What resonated most with you?
Yes, and what kind of gave me the horrors most, and so that was it. So it was a short essay for the longest listen. But it wasn't. I have no regrets about it. And as I say, I always dipped into the Bible. I've received a few letters asking me to join different Bible groups, study groups since then. But I didn't want to be under any pressure with it, and I wasn't. And it's done now.
You went about it the clever way and listened to it on Audible, because I had, like I think a lot of us during lockdown, we kind of went, this is my chance to read something big that I've been putting off reading, and managed to get through a few things that I'd hoped to, but I thought I'd read the Bible as well, but I didn't get that far into it.
And I mean, the King James, as opposed to, we'll say, a Catholic Bible. The reason for that was it was purported to be really the best one, and it was the one that's always quoted in literature. You see something and you might see a little quote from the King James Bible, and I thought that's the one.
It's written in that Elizabethan English style, whereas because the one that I was reading was written in more contemporary English, but there's so much kind of melodrama in the Bible, and there's so much
misogyny. Women are really kind
of very
a lot of the time.
There's a lot of violence and everything.
My
But
goodness.
the Elizabethan English, I think, nearly enhances that even more, doesn't it? How did you find that, or did you find?
Well, the King James, I thought I liked the narrator. Now, his name has just gone.
Is it Chris Chris
Is-
Griffin, Chris Glynn.
Glynn, that's
Glynn.
right. It's is it Philip Glynn? I've forgotten his name now, so I don't want to say it in case it's definitely Glynn. But I found his voice mesmerising,
Beautiful,
and I
yeah.
mean anything. If I didn't understand, it was okay. You know, I kind of knew where the story was going, but
I've heard it before.
yeah, I heard it before. But and then the belly of the whale, and then when you think about some of them, and poor Job. You know, he had to do so many. He had to lose his whole family, and you know the trials, and they were all kind of. We're going to tell you the story, but it didn't really happen. But we're telling you so that you can learn from this. And but I always loved the parables going to school. If I could say that I liked anything from school, and I left school fairly early, I did love the parables, and I liked that kind of thing. You know, where you'd hear a story. And it wouldn't be exactly what the story was about, but you think, what exactly does that mean? And it's something else. You know?
I suppose it comes from an oral tradition as
It
well,
does, of course,
and
yeah, absolutely.
that leads into it too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it is fascinating. And it's you know, just as a work of literature alone,
Absolutely.
and all the different narratives that are in the Bible.
Yeah, and
yeah.
what do you call? I had read, a friend of mine gave me Moby Dick years ago, and I thought, oh my God, she's passed away, and I haven't read it. So I took time out years ago to read it, and wasn't Melville hugely influenced by the Bible?
Yeah. But I often think if you take the Bible, the Greek mythology, and Shakespeare out of the English language,
What have you? Yes.
we've very little left.
That's right,
And we're, you know, on a daily basis, we're all referencing them without even knowing that we're doing it.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
which is amazing. Of course, you have lots of other collections of poetry and essays and plays, as we mentioned. And I don't know if either of you would like to
The two I loved, I had gone into the original collection, 1987 was it? Goddess of the Murray Bus?
86.
86?
Actually,
Wow, incredible. And I loved these two. I picked two in particular. Obviously the title poem, Goddess on the Merview Bus, and Consumptive in the Library. I had to pick that.
Of course.
Okay.
So those were my two favourites. So would you mind reading those for us today, Rita?
I'd love to read them. I'm reading from the original book, but I think the goddess was Roman instead of Greek, and we had to... Anyway, long story short, as they say. So, consumptive in the library. About you carry a kidney donor card not yet filled in, a St. Christopher's round your neck on a brown shoelace, to ward off demons and politicians. Memories of sweet Afton, the racing page from the Daily Express, and an unsociable cough. About me, I carry illusions of becoming a famous poet. Guilt about that one time in Baltinglass, fear that the lift will stop at Limbo, a slight touch of sciatica plus an anthology of the Ulster poets. Unlike your peers, you will not take warmth from cold churches or soup kitchens. Instead, for long periods, you will exasperate would-be poets with illusions in the reference room of the Galway County Library. I started with Heaney, you started to cough. You coughed all the way to Ormsby. I was on the verge of Mahon. Daunted, I left you the Ulster poets to consume or cough at. I moved to the medical section. And the other one that you referenced is the title of my first collection. So I might have made slight changes, like a word here. I don't know, I'll just read this one. Goddess on the Merview Bus, for yourself. Aphrodite of the homely bungalow, cross curtains, off-white Anglia at the side. Your father, who is no Zeus, turns old scrap into rolled gold nightly from memory, looks down on you from his scrap mountain, hurling forks of caution about the tin can man who fumbles in the aisle of the Merview bus, longing for the chance of a throwaway smile, a discarded bus ticket. O goddess on the Merview bus, no scrap dealer fashioned you from memory or want. You were spun from golden dust, a dash of dream. Enslaver of mortals, you choose me. Once when you yawned, I envisioned myself sitting cross-legged on a lonely molar, waiting for the crunch.
I love that image at the end, sitting cross-legged on someone's tooth, waiting for the crunch. I think that's right.
I mean, wow. That was really, really lovely. And yeah, thank you again for joining us. I do want to know though, at the end, when Pennies did open, did you make your altar in the garden and burn your incense and how
It's funny how we make promises and don't always keep them. I did go into Pennies a couple of times, but like it became normal so quickly. You know, we were deprived of it, and then all of a sudden it was there, and I did appreciate it, but the altar was never put up. So, you know, guilty.
That's fantastic. And as you mentioned, you know, your Audible listen in part 2, we'll be discussing audiobooks in more detail. So we'll see you then.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
So welcome back. Rita Ann has left us, and we've been discussing and mulling over some of her poems here since. And we were chatting about her long listen and about audiobooks in general, and how there seems to be an increase in the number of people listening to e-audiobooks, and a change in how people have been reading over the pandemic and what they've been reading, with an interest more in more reflective reading such as poetry, and a lot of listening as well. Ruth, I know you're a big fan of audiobooks, and you manage the audio service for visually impaired people for Galway County Libraries. Can you tell us a bit about what you've been listening to in relation to ebooks, or observations you may have made?
Yeah, I mean, so I really got into the audiobooks on BorrowBox during the first lockdown. So I started knitting again. I moved back home with my parents, and I kind of took up that old hobby. So it was a great pastime because it was very relaxing, and then you're listening at the same time, so you really feel like you're doing something and creating something, and also absorbing like a lovely story. Some of the books I loved listening to were Circe by Madeline Miller, which is a retelling of some of the Greek mythologies, the story of Odysseus, but from the point of view of Circe the witch, whose island he lands on. So that was really interesting to listen to. And yeah, it's great for the longer books as well, which I haven't tackled because usually they do, the length does put me off, so fair play to Rita for taking on the King James Bible.
Yeah.
Now, so we were just talking about the service in general. In Galway last year in 2020, there was 93,000 issues of audiobooks in the county. So it really has been something that people have taken up as they've been walking and passing the time during lockdown. And then also we have this audiobook service, home delivery service that we run from Ballybane Library. Some people, you know, mightn't have the technology available to them to listen to the books on BorrowBox, and they just prefer, for whatever reason, they prefer having the CDs, the physical thing in their hand. So
just show people that, because
like
they might be interested in, as well as for the less techie among people, and it's just really handy if for older people maybe to have, if you still have your CD player dusted down. We have a fantastic collection of books on CD, and as Ruth was mentioning, for some of the old classics, or for the Shakespeare plays that I have here, I think the classics read particularly beautifully, don't they, on to listen to?
yeah, absolutely. Especially with the older style of English, you often need to take it a bit slower, and I think listening really forces you to do that, to slow down and to kind of really absorb what's being said. So yeah, we send out books free of charge with On Post to patrons on our list, and we send them out weekly on a weekly basis. We have about 40 people that we send them to, and so far in 2021 we've sent out about 500 books on CD to various people in County Galway.
And a lot of those would have been cocooners as
Definitely,
well, in that early
yeah.
phase of cocooning.
Yeah.
So really important.
It's
to
really a
them.
service for the housebound, and I suppose they were maybe even more housebound during the pandemic, or had less contact with the outside world. So I think they were very appreciative of the postman coming on a weekly basis with, you know, stories of different times and, you know, different worlds. So yeah.
And it's interesting how you mentioned your take, because I think a lot of people took up crafts and running and walking during when we were all kind of circling our 5K, and having an audiobook to listen to while doing that is great. You can. I used to kind of wonder, is it cheating to listen to an audiobook rather than read the book? But of course you're still reading. But when you look at, because I know some of the like BorrowBox and Audible providers of audiobooks and ebooks will give you badges for, you know, when you've accomplished a certain number, when you've read a certain number, you get a badge. And it's amazing to see that you might have read or listened to, you know, 50 books in a year, but you would never sit down and read that amount. So it does it does allow you to cover ground that you might not have the time to cover.
Yeah, definitely. And even looking at screens all day as well, it's just a great way to switch off and give your eyes a break, you know.
Yeah, that's a good idea. They were, as you said, particularly for people who were cocooning, and we did have the home delivery service of books, physical books as well, to people who were cocooning, and that was very popular during lockdown as well. And I suppose we missed our in-person reading groups. Like all our libraries would have, some of them would have 2 or 3 reading groups that would meet in the libraries on a regular basis, usually monthly. And like all that went with lockdown, and that was so challenging. That was one thing people said to us, gosh, we miss coming into the library, we miss our groups, our events, our reading groups. So I suppose that's where switching online, this pivot online came about. And then we launched our 3 online reading groups, Read Together. So they meet monthly as well, the last Wednesday of the month, and we have a Read Together at 1, Read Together at 4, and Read Together at 7.
Okay.
So that's been so successful, and many of the members are people who were in our in-person reading groups, but we've also got a whole new audience, people who've joined who weren't in reading groups before, and they love the accessibility of the online meeting. You don't actually have to physically get yourself to a building.
Yeah,
You can log in from home, and people have loved that. So I think we've tapped into a whole new audience that we didn't have before. And I would see the online reading groups lasting even when we'll have all our events back in our libraries.
Great,
I
yeah.
think the two will probably continue in tandem. We'll have our in-person reading groups and we'll have our online reading groups, and I see that as being very important as well.
And there was a lovely series of reading groups with celebrating Galway writers as well.
Yes, the Irish Dylan, and that was online as well. There were a couple of sessions of that, and that was I was actually joined one of those myself. It was lovely. I really enjoyed it. It was Emily Cullen actually hosted that. Absolutely wonderful.
And I took part in the ones that featured Eileen O'Connor and Anne Costello.
Yes.
And
Or Mary Costello.
Mary Costello,
Yes. Yeah,
Mary
yeah,
Costello. And it kind of led me down a kind of a Joycean path then, because Eileen O'Connor's lovely book Nora,
Yes.
which I then read, that covers a fictional account of the life of Nora Barnacle, being the wife of the great writer, which was, she really immersed herself in character, great book. Yeah. And then Mary Costello, you have Academy Street there, but her newest book, The River Capture, is also references Ulysses, and the central character in that is obsessed with Ulysses.
Ulysses, that's right.
And hers is really quite daring, because she actually, to take on James Joyce and Ulysses as a central theme in your book.
But I think
She's
Mary
a brave writer.
Mary's a big fan though, she's a huge
Oh, she
fan.
it's clear, yeah.
And she was here in Ballybane Library in the past. We had invited her to come to our reading group because we had actually read Mary Costello's Academy Street with the Wednesday reading group that was, and they really loved it. So we had invited her in to visit the library and speak to the reading group and other library patrons as well. And she was a lovely, lovely, lovely person. But her first collection, it was a collection of short stories, The China Factory. So she's a really, really good short story writer as well. And segueing then into short stories, a collection I'm really enjoying, edited by Sinead Leeson, is The Art of the Glimpse, which is Irish short story writers. And this is a fantastic book. Obviously it's a big tome, 700 or 800 pages, so it'll take a while to get through that. But one of Mary Costello's stories is in that. Just read that, and one by Leyland Bard. Well, I've just read, and actually Nuala O'Connor, because you mentioned Nuala has a story in it as well. So that's something I really recommend for people who love short stories, and maybe for people who are new to short stories. The Art of the Glimpse. That's a nice one. And another one I wanted to mention, and I know Ruth has read this as well and really enjoyed it, is Shuggy Bain by Douglas Stewart.
Yeah. So
Booker winner last year. It's an amazing, absolutely amazing read. It's really, in essence, it is the author's own life story. Growing up at the tenements in Glasgow, very impoverished childhood, very challenging, very difficult childhood. His mother was an alcoholic, and his father had left the family, and really, Shuggy had to bring himself up really, and the character goes on, he looks after the mother for so long. He stays with her as long as he can, and then eventually he just can't. He says, I can't do any more for you. And he goes out on his own around the age of 16 and lives in a bedsit and finishes school himself independently. But it's an incredible story, and usually sometimes when I see it's won the Booker, I kind of say, I don't know, will that be very highbrow? But not at all. It's very accessible, very readable, and definitely recommend that one. Do I have anything else there? Yeah, in the online reading group, Read Together. This is what we're reading at the moment, the Nuala Foyle on, Are You Somebody? Again, I would have read that years ago when it came out first, and I always loved it. But we're rereading it now in the online book club, and we're absolutely loving it. Thinking about Nuala, and obviously she's not with us anymore, and thinking about that interview with Marion Finucane, and the diagnosis, obviously the terminal diagnosis that she got. And actually that year, that February, I'd been at the Ennis, that was March actually, I'd been at the Ennis Book Club Festival, and Nuala was speaking at it. There was a session on memoir, and she was one of the panellists. And she just, I remember her saying that she had been for tests to the Galway Clinic, and she was waiting the results of those tests. And then by April, she was on the Marion Finucane show speaking about her terminal diagnosis. And that interview is incredible, it just puts shivers down your spine if you listen back to it. So I think it's nice to honour Nuala and to be reading that now with our online.
it is, and it's literature is great actually in dealing with topics like fear and grief, which have been so prevalent throughout the pandemic as well. And those kinds of books are being revisited as well, because they honour not just Nuala but many other lives as well. Which is, quite poignant.
It's definitely one to recommend as well. So it's lovely to read the new books and the newest publications, but I often find for a reading group, we go back a lot to classics, like we read Rebecca there recently as well with the group. We'll go back into classics, Wuthering Heights, we did it here with the Ballybane group actually as well. And I find sometimes you get a great discussion from that book, an even better discussion than you get from a new book. And I don't know why. Is it that people have read the book before and that they're rereading it and seeing different things in it? But often I find it's the older books, you just get a great discussion going. That's what I find. Like some of the books we read now, I'll just mention a few of them. We read The Dutch House by Anne Patchett. Again, that's out a few years. Girl, Woman, Other, Bernardine Evaristo. That's out a couple of years. Rebecca, as I mentioned. The English Patient, that's going back to the early 90s. We got a great discussion from that. And On Beauty by Zadie Smith, which is also 2005, I think. So you're talking 15, 16 years there as well. So yeah, we find that the group suggests a lot of the reading, and I find people are picking the older books, not just the classics, older fiction, older non-fiction as well.
Is it that a lot of that's what is being published in recent times has been very issue based, whereas that kind of marketing pressure maybe wasn't on writers so much in the past, perhaps. I'm noticing that some of the new books that are coming out, there's some really good quality fiction and non-fiction coming out this autumn, and there's some that I'm really looking forward to. The Magician by Colm Tobin. Sebastian Fox has a new book. Sally Rooney has a new book coming out. But I'm noticing that there's good quality literature coming out at the moment, and I'm wondering, is it because people had time to devote to their writing in more depth, and maybe editors also had more time? You didn't have the pressure of so many deadlines as deadlines were deferred to wait for kind of markets to open up.
Could be. Some of them, maybe they were due a book, if you like, as well.
Yeah.
People tend to publish every couple of years, and maybe some of them, like Colm Tobin, were due to publish. That's quite possible as well. But I'd love to read the Thomas Mann, the one based on Thomas Mann's life. That sounds very, very interesting. That's on my list as well, Eileen. So thanks for reminding me.
I'm trying to see, will he do, because Colm is great for kind of putting himself in the shoes of whatever story he's telling. And I remember when he wrote The Master by about Henry James, how he emulated the writing style of Henry James in that. And I'm interested to see how he deals with Thomas Mann then.
That's fascinating, and the whole Venice connection as well. I think Colm went to Venice, I think, as part of his research.
Did he?
Yeah, he did.
Nice.
Yeah, he article in the LRB about him walking around Venice and churches.
Very good. A lot of people have been reading travel books as well, even though they can't go
Escapism,
anywhere.
armchair travelling.
Although we shouldn't be we have to watch our carbon footprint now as well.
Yes.
And I suppose maybe that's when we're travelling through literature, maybe
It's probably more eco-friendly.
as well as the COVID putting a stop to our gallop. We have to be more environmentally conscious. I'm interested with you have Climate Justice there.
Climate Justice by Mary Robinson, which is a very accessible book if you were looking to learn more about climate justice. It's kind of accounts of various activists from around the world and their causes. I suppose it's really important to remember that with climate change, it's a real issue of inequality. The people who've done the most to cause it are the ones that are going to suffer least from it, basically. And I think Mary Robinson really understands that as an issue as well. It's definitely an issue of inequality. So this is a great introduction if someone is looking to read more about climate change and to figure out what's happening around the world to different communities. So this is a good one. And there's some brilliant books out recently. Rob Hopkins has a book called What If? He's the founder of the transition movement, and he kind of talks about the climate crisis as an issue of a failure of imagination. So we need to be able to imagine, what if things turned out okay, and that's how we can act to create that future that we want to see. So I think reading about climate change is a great act in itself. Of feeling like you're doing something and learning more about it. So. Yeah.
And you've been reading Roisin Croward, I see, as well?
Yeah, so this is, I guess, a new non-fiction, to kind of link it back to Nuala. It's a book of issues. I guess it's a lot about someone who grew up in the age of the internet, about her anxieties and her issues around it. She talks a lot about her insomnia, staying up all night drinking cans of Monster, working to deadlines, and just living her life online and her online relationships and her online kind of persona. So it's a very timely book. I don't know if it will stand the test of time in the way that others do, but it's definitely a good insight into the age of the internet and what it does to people's relationships with themselves and with others.
And you have a short story collection.
A short story collection from Louise Kennedy. The End of the World is a cul-de-sac.
She's a Sligo writer, is she?
She's a Sligo writer, yeah. She, this is her first book, I think. She was a chef for years, and they're just kind of a study of sort of post-Celtic Tiger Ireland and people's lives in a small town. I think the setting is Sligo for most of them.
And she's getting fantastic reviews, isn't she?
Yeah, it's a brilliant book. Yeah, so I would really recommend that one as well. Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned the disconnect there, because we have a collection of books called Read Your Mind, which were selected by Jigsaw, and we have noticed that they have been flying out the door since we reopened our doors. Anxiety has been a huge issue for a lot of people over pandemic, and we have with our Healthy Ireland at Your Library and our Read Your Mind collection, there are lots of resources.
And the Healthy Ireland event, the programme for the autumn is being drawn up at the moment, and what we're working on is, it's online events at the moment, again, because we weren't permitted to have live events obviously in our library, so for the moment it's all programming online, but we've some great topics coming up again on mental and physical health, lots of different experts in those areas, but after Christmas again we would hope to bring live events back into our libraries, and we'll have some Healthy Ireland events in our libraries, which is always very important as well.
A lot of people have found great solace in nature as well, I think, and I think there's been a surge in nature writing as well. I've been listening to a beautifully narrated book called The Living Mountain by Nan Shepherd, which was written back in 1910, but it's narrated, recently released e-audiobook, and narrated by Tilda Swinton, beautifully narrated, and it takes you up to the Scottish Highlands, and just some wonderful nature writing. You just feel yourself immersed in the descriptions of kind of walking through a frozen cloud basically on top of the mountains, and it's just a beautiful read. Vesper Flights is another lovely book that's a nature example of nature writing again, and I have to share this one with you because I absolutely love it. The Lost Words. It's just a beautifully illustrated book for all ages, and it's because we are losing so much of our ecosystem as well, and so in among these beautiful illustrations of nature, you have words to find, and they're all words pertaining to nature. So they're hidden among these. Not sure if I can spot this one. We've got a woodland, and highlighted in blue, if we start searching, you can spell out the word bluebell. So you can see the bluebells among the trees. And it's just absolutely gorgeous. You've got your brambles there, and there's little kind of poems to go with it. So I think people, become more observant, which is great for both reading and writing, because of course...
And as you said, running and exercise, that was a huge thing through the pandemic, and that obviously ties in with Healthy Ireland and the Read Your Mind books, Eileen. I'm reading a book at the moment called Coasting, and it's an English writer who ran all around the English coast over a course of a year.
Okay.
I think about 5,000 kilometres, she said, roughly, that's what it was. And she did it in 10 months, actually. She came in under the year. But it's fascinating, the hardship. She just literally had a little backpack on her back with one change of running gear, not even her regular clothes, if you will, just a change of running gear. And she really relied on the kindness of strangers. She stayed with people that she knew through her Facebook running group, here and there. She originally planned to pitch a tent, but she kind of balked on the idea of the tent and ended up staying with friends and friends of friends, and got through. But it's an incredible achievement. Yeah. And she wasn't a very experienced ultra runner when she started. She had done a few half marathons, I think one full marathon, but to take it from that base and run all around England, I think it's an incredible story. So that's called Coasting.
Very good. A lot of people have been looking for escapism as well, I think. And I have to say, one of the books that I really enjoyed just for a bit of fun was The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. Just great laugh, good laugh.
Has he a new one coming out?
He does, that's another new one coming out. And I really enjoyed listening to Stephen Fry. To nurture your inner child, you have to listen to Stephen Fry narrating the Harry Potter books. I got hooked on the entire series. He just narrates them brilliantly. But yeah, this is another new book out, and there's so many fantastic new books coming out. I think we need another lockdown to get through them all. So.
And Elif Shafak, just to mention Elif Shafak as
Oh,
well.
yeah,
Brilliant
Songbirds.
author. Yeah, I
Beautiful
love
book, yeah.
Elif Shafak. And another one I read during the pandemic, and it was made into a Netflix series as well, is Unorthodox, about a woman who was part of the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community in New York. And it's quite a restricted life, particularly for women. And she's railed against the lifestyle, and eventually she left and went to Germany, joined her mother there. But it's a fascinating story, and it is on Netflix again if someone wanted to either read the book first and then watch the Netflix series, or vice versa. I think that's a nice way to approach it as well. And funnily enough, with the English Patient that I mentioned that we read as part of book club, some people thought the film was great. Like, in fairness, normally I find the book is better than the film. That would be a general rule. But in this instance, they all said, you know what, I think the English Patient, the movie, was better.
Yeah.
So you rarely hear that, but that was one example.
It was a great movie as well, yeah. Listen, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Eileen.
It's been lovely chatting. And as I say, we could go on and on and on, but we better call a halt to it somewhere. So good night, and thank you for tuning in to us, and we look forward to seeing you back in person in the libraries very, very soon.